We have a quorum. I call the meeting to order. First of all, confirmation of minutes of the last meeting. Paper number CB bracket 4439/14 to 15 is the meeting on the 8th of December last year. The Secretariat has not received any proposals for amendment. I'd like to ask members to endorse the minutes of meeting, supported by Mr. Kenneth Chan and other members. Information papers issued since the last meeting. There is only one. You'll find the detail on the agenda. Next meeting is CB bracket 4457/14 to 15. Annex 1 and 2. It's scheduled on the 9th of March, which is a Monday, at 4:30. But I'd like to ask members, I am out of town on the 9th of March, because this is during the week of the CPPCC and the NPCSC. But the Deputy Chairman is in Hong Kong. If you would like... If you don't mind, then we will change the time. Otherwise, we will stick to the original plan. But if you would like to accommodate me, then it will be postponed to the 16th of March, which is also a Monday, at 5:30. Ms. Chang, let's wait for you to return. Mr. Wong Kok King? Well, can't do without you. Mr. Tam Yu Chung? Well, on that day, a lot of us will be in Beijing. If you agree, let's change the meeting time to 5:30 on the 16th of March. And the administration proposes two items for discussion. One is the application of applied study in the senior secondary school, and the other one is in relation to scholarship of the Hong Kong SARG, and also the scholarship programs of self-financed tertiary institution. There will be discussions about the different awards and the allocation of these awards and distribution. On the 15th of February, well, actually the 22nd of February, it's the budget. Hopefully, there will be some initiatives related to the education sector. That's why we've decided to wait till after the budget speech, so that we can have a discussion about education-related initiatives in the budget. Well, on the we will wait till the 25th of February to see what special matters members would like to discuss. If there isn't anything, I will talk to the deputy about items that we can add to from the list. Dr. Kenneth Chan, I agree that we should set aside some time to see if there is any news from the budget. On the 4th of February, I sent a letter to the Secretariat about the alleged divulgence of information about a research about a study paper, which is an assessment report of 2014. What happened was that there was a report and somehow it was leaked, and it targeted the Faculty of Law and the esteemed Dr. Joannes Chan of the Hong Kong U. And we would like to get some reply. Let's see if the research grant Council would give us a written reply. There is a signed petition from the education sector. This is a serious matter. We're all very concerned. After receiving your reply, I have spoken to the Education Bureau, and there is a letter dated on the 4th of February. Today's only the 9th. I don't know if they have given us a reply, but I will follow this up. Yes, please, let's see if we have time on that day to talk about this. Miss Priscilla Leung. As you all know that in the past few years, liberal study as a subject has been quite controversial. And I think we need to set aside some time to discuss about the review of liberal studies. Perhaps we can organize a public hearing. I have received a lot of requests from students, from parents, from teachers. Perhaps we can invite them to join us. Yes, I received your letter dated the 2nd of February. You have mentioned this to me a number of times, and even on the first meeting, and I'm aware of the issue, and I will make arrangements. But I've not heard anything from you. No, that's not right. We are talking about the items for discussion for the next meeting. Priority should be given to the budget. If there is no special matters to be discussed, then we will weigh up all the different issues and those on the list of outstanding items to see what the items should be included. Because right after the budget, it's most appropriate to discuss the budget. I don't mind doing that. However, this year I hope there will be some specific arrangement. I believe that we will inevitably have a discussion about liberal studies, but if you ask me to assign a month, that will be difficult. But I'm sure that we can't escape from a discussion of liberal studies. Miss Ang Chang, did you raise your hand? No, I was just indicating my support to you. Mr. Tommy Joe, I heard, I was sitting next to Dr. Kenneth Chan. I'm afraid that you will be too accommodating. I think about that issue is more a report from the press than a conclusion that the COHK is superior over Hong Kong U. Well, I am a graduate of the COHK, but I don't know how the report is compiled, and I think it will be difficult to say which is more superior. I think it's just a story cooked up by the press than the content of the report. There's no need to add this item. This is the worst panel of all years because items have been added. You say yes to requests raised by members, and if we do that, we're doomed. Let me reply to Mr. Tommy Zhang. If members raise their hands, I will allow them to speak unless it is a digression. Of course, what they say may not be something you agree with, but at least they should be given a chance to speak because it's their right. And we're talking about items to be discussed in the next meeting. Everyone is entitled their opinion. This is not a debate. Please don't get into a debate. Okay, I'm not going to debate on this. Just now, Dr. Kenneth Chen talked about the issue, and I think it's very important. It should be discussed in the next meeting. Okay. Now, in the agenda proper. Before we start, let me remind you that in accordance with Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure, if there are any matters that have direct or indirect pecuniary interest related to members, you have to declare the interest before you speak. First, class-to-teacher ratio and staff establishment in primary schools. I would like to ask the administration to join us first. And if you would like to speak, or if you would like to ask questions, please put your hands up so that the clerk can jot your names down. Well, there is a paper given to us by the Subsidized Primary Schools Council. First of all, I would like to ask Mr. Kevin Young, Undersecretary for Education, to take us through CB bracket 4457/14-15 bracket 01.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, currently, through 3 channels, we are providing manpower resources to public sector primary schools. In the year 27-28, we have been having specially trained teachers for their relevant subjects. In other words, we have got a class ratio of 1.5 and 1.4 and 1.5 teachers per bisessional and whole day class respectively. We've got more teachers as a result of teacher librarian posts. There are also grants, cash grants, to allow the schools to get the necessary manpower or to procure the necessary resources. So it won't just be limited to the figure arrived at by making reference to the class-to-teacher ratio. This should not be regarded as the only factor to judge how much we are supporting the schools, other than looking at the approved staff establishment in the year 2014-15 for each public sector primary school. We have got an administrative grant for additional clerical assistant so that they can get the necessary resources. We have got small class teaching in order to provide resources in terms of manpower and also to tie in with the new initiative. We have been enhancing the establishment. In the year 2008-2009, we have got the senior teacher post and the deputy head rank, and as a result of the various initiatives, the teacher-student ratio has been decreasing all the time. Instead of 18.4, it has been enhanced to 1 teacher to 14 students. As to the unit cost in the past 8 years, we have already increased it by 92%. We will be working through the normal channels to get the necessary resources. For 3 years in a row, there will be more degree holder teachers, that is graduate teacher posts, starting from 2015-16 to 2017-18, and the ratio will be increased from the current 50% to 65%. That's all from me, teacher. Dennis Kwok, Wong Kwok Hing, Ann Jang, Deputy Chair, myself, Kenneth Chen. Who else would like to speak? We may not have a second round of questions because we need to end this part by 5:10. Mr. Dennis Kwok, I read the paper. I don't quite understand the policy objectives in this regard. Would you like to encourage more small class teaching, that is driving down the class-to-teacher ratio all the time, or what? Or you want to ask the schools to reach a particular student-to-teacher ratio? What is that ratio? When will it be reached, and how? I've read reports that 47% of the aided schools are flooded with resources, and a lot of them have been channeled to the reserve. So they have the resources. I want to know why the student-to-teacher ratio cannot be enhanced even further. Undersecretary, for primary schools, we haven't a specific student-to-teacher ratio. For small class teaching, our policy is clear. As far as possible, we support primary schools in operating small class teaching. There is 25 students in a class, and we are running whole day schooling for primary schools, and then it means the class teacher ratio would be 1.5. There are also other policy initiatives, say, for example, the number of guidance teachers. We've also got cash grants for the students with SEN, as they would require more manpower. For primary schools, when the primary school student population falls, then I think the class-to-teacher ratio would be improved. But we do not actually have a particular optimal class-to-teacher ratio. I think it is your objective to improve it, right? As far as the number of teachers and also the amount of resources available are concerned, we'll be providing adequate teacher resources so that whether they run small classes or large classes, they'll still be able to deliver in terms of learning and teaching. I don't think you have answered my question. 47% of the aided schools have been found to be having a lot of money in their reserve. Why haven't they used such money to engage more teachers or pay a higher salary to the teachers? For aided schools, there is a salary scale for teachers, so it is not feasible to provide a higher pay to the teachers. In the case of reserves, schools have flexibility to do a lot of things. Recruiting more teachers is, of course, one of the possibilities. Thank you. Mr. Wong Kwok Heng. I understand that there will be an increase in the ratio of graduate teacher posts. It will be done by phases in 3 years. I welcome the idea, but can it not be done more quickly? Undersecretary, can you tell us how many teachers are already graduate teachers, but they are not being recruited as on such a basis? Because I want to say that I wonder whether it would be the case that a lot of teachers have already got a degree and yet they are not being employed on such a basis, and they don't get the relevant salary and benefits. I think it is a very real question. Please answer the question. Mr. Tang will give us the figures in a moment. Please give us the answer directly. For primary schools, 90% of the teachers are degree holders. When we considered increasing the ratio of graduate teacher posts, we took that into account. Currently, about 4% of the teachers are not degree holders. For graduate teacher posts, we increased it from 35% to 50%, and 87% of them have been filled. I think we need to be gradual. And it is up to schools to decide how to deploy the resources and how to increase the ratio gradually. Well, 90% of them are degree holders. Why can't we allow all the 90% of the degree holders to hold graduate teacher posts? Now, there will only be 65% at the end of the day. In other words, there will be another 30% of the teachers who will be left out. Is it due to a lack of money? So, Undersecretary, for us to have 100% being the ratio of graduate teacher posts, it will be a long-term goal. It depends on the pace. Now, we have got it at 50% currently. There are still 10%. There's still 10% of the posts which haven't been filled by graduate teachers. We'll be watching the development and we'll be taking a gradual step. If it is found that the effect is good, we will continue to roll this out. I cannot understand why are you not going to fill all the posts, because they're not able to do it or you lack the money? Next, Dr. N. Jiang. Now, for the class-to-teacher ratio and the staff establishment, I think they have to do with the student population. Say, for example, if there is a fall in the primary student population, it means that we do need to get more teachers. That may be the case. But then when the population increases, then we may have to consider whether there is a need to increase the number of teacher posts. Currently, I don't know. Why we are increasing the establishment. Is it because we've trained too many teachers? And so there is an oversupply of teachers, and therefore we have to increase the ratio, or what is the reason? Undersecretary, for the class-to-teacher ratio, it means that when a class is operated, then a certain number of teachers will be provided. For whole-day primary schools, it will be 1.5 teachers per class. So for a 24-class school, there will be 36 teachers. According to this class-to-teacher ratio, Ms. Zhang is right to say that when primary student population increases, more classes will be formed, and then there is a need for more teachers. We have to recruit more teachers. We have said that for the ratio of graduate teacher posts, we are not talking about increasing the number of places. Currently, some teachers are graduate teachers, some are non-graduate teachers. It all depends whether they have got the graduate qualification. In the past, we used to have 50%. Now, we are going to increase it to 65%. It has got no direct relationship with the total number of teachers. Well, I want to know that in the area of teacher training, I think it has been said for quite some time that after receiving training, we haven't got sufficient teacher posts for the graduates. I think the UGC is now talking to the various tertiary institutions about the future 3 years planning. So perhaps you have to tell them how many teachers you need in 3 years' time. Otherwise, there will be an oversupply of teachers, and then you're going to affect their career opportunities. Mr. Young, yes, for the number of teachers to be trained, we do discuss the matter with the tertiary institutions during the 3-year cycles. Mr. Yip, 3 minutes. That will be too short a period of time for me to say much. And the paper doesn't afford a lot to be said. The title of the paper is about class-to-teacher ratio and staff establishment. But then the only one of interest would be paragraph 4. The rest of the paper is associated but not directly related. As Mr. Young has said, for each class you get 1.5 teachers. Why has it been pitched at 1.5? Can it not be improved? I think that's the crux of the matter. Would you like to give the floor to the Undersecretary? Why 1.5? Any improvement? Mr. Yip, the Deputy Chair, must have read the entirety of the paper. Over time, we have been providing more teachers as a result of different policy initiatives, say, for example, guidance teachers, etc. Mr. Chairman, of course, I've read the paper and I understand the point made by the Undersecretary. As I have said, they are associated but not directly related, because you want to enhance guidance work, you want to enhance curriculum coordination, but then the posts have been created to deal with new issues. Now, for class-to-teacher ratio, we are talking about the ordinary times. For each class, how many teachers should be given. If you have fewer teachers, then they have to work harder. If you have more teachers, then the workload will be reasonable.
But what is reasonable? That goes back to the point. How did you set the 1.5? If there are too few teachers, then workload will increase. We have compared Hong Kong with neighboring places. In Hong Kong, primary schools, a week, a teacher will have 26 to 27 lessons. In neighboring places, only 10 or so, or 20 at most. In the past, we assumed that teachers will only teach. But now, the situation has changed. With the shift in pedagogy, and with the same establishment, that means teachers will be overworked. Can we start a formal review? We've been monitoring the changes in the establishment of primary schools and also their workload. Because of the increase in workload, we have increased the number of special posts. Myself and Dr. Kenneth Chan, Leung Kwok Hong, but I will put myself at the back of the queue. Dr. Chan. But just now, the Deputy Chairman, Mr. Ip, has hit the bullseye. Why it has to be set at 1.5 to begin with. In paragraph 12, the administration said that according to the 2012-13 school year, the auditor accounts of aided primary schools, that is, nearly 200 of them, about 47% of these schools had a cumulative surplus amounting to about 5 or more months of their average monthly expenditure. For 5% of them, they had over 10 months of their average monthly expenditure. I have a question for the Undersecretary. This statement and the relevant press reports I have read, does it mean that, well, if you want to increase the number of teachers, don't try to get the money from my pocket. Use your surplus, exhaust your surplus, and if there is still not enough, then you can come to us. So, is that what you mean, Undersecretary? Is that what you imply by this sentence? If you want to reduce the class-to-teacher ratio, then do it with your own resources, Undersecretary. The way paragraph 12 is worded is that it is very important to make good use of resources. For some schools, there is surplus. If the schools think fit, they can recruit assistants or short-term teachers to help. And that is one of the alternatives. It doesn't mean that we see that as a solution. Say, for example, for some schools, if the teachers think that workload is too much, well, that is an indirect answer. It's not compulsory, but if you have money, you should think about the solution yourself. But when it comes to very old schools, they have to set aside a large amount of money for expenditure, say, for example, to repair a leak roof. And in recent times, they have to recruit substitute teachers because some teachers have fallen ill because of the influenza. I don't think this is an appropriate way, because this would give us the impression that, well, schools are left to their own devices. Well, unless you can give us a very clear guideline saying that you will have to first exhaust your resources before you come to us to ask for more teachers. I I find this very puzzling, and I can understand that teachers are having a very tough time. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. It says that they will continue to monitor the situation to meet the demand, and there is limited resources. That means for schools with surplus, then they will have to make use of the surplus. Okay, fine. For schools with over $1 million, then they can employ maybe an extra teacher. But what about those schools with no surplus? Should they do nothing? Is it the case that for rich schools, they can use their own money to improve the class-to-teacher ratio? What if they don't have the money? Undersecretary, when we calculate the class-to-teacher ratio and the cash grants and the various additional posts because of special needs, what we had in mind is that with that, there will be sufficient manpower for quality education. But different school is different. For some schools, they have used their own resources to recruit more people, and as a result, there is no surplus left. So they should feel more comfortable with their manpower level. You mean that those schools with surplus did not recruit more teachers to alleviate the workload of teachers? Is that what you say? No, I am not going to make such deduction. If they have exhausted their resources, it doesn't mean that they have recruited more teachers. Maybe it was put to other uses. But the money can be used to improve teaching and learning. The class-to-teacher ratio is a benchmark. You talk about special measures to provide additional manpower. They are to help management, thereby taking away the workload of teachers. But as Mr. Ip said, that teachers are required to do a lot of things, and that is excluded in the calculation of class-to-teacher ratio. So, are you saying that the initiatives set out in paragraph 5 are to help teachers? Yes, those set out in paragraph 5 are to help schools to alleviate the huge demand in manpower. Let me interject. And I think it's a bit misleading. In paragraph 12, you say that you imply that for some schools they have a lot of resources. You pointed out that 5% of the schools had over 10 months of expenditure. But 5% is a very small number. You can't say that, well, because 5% has a lot of surplus, so as a whole, schools are quite rich. But that's beside the point. We just want to understand the situation. If you mislead us, well, if for members who don't have the time to read the paper, it may be misleading. Now it's my turn. I think you agree that education is all linked. Primary, kindergarten, secondary, and university, they are equally important. You constantly talk to people from the education sector. You must be aware of the fact that they are very unhappy. There is a lot of grievance in relation to the structure, the arrangement system, and manpower level. What they feel is that they have been neglected for a very long time. You have to attach importance to teachers, to manpower, to primary school education, and you have to respect them. And in the policy address, it said that in the coming 3 years, the posts of GM will increase from 50% to 65%. So are there any plans to do something for primary and secondary schools to bring the GM ratio up? If not, how come that there is a different ratio of GM teachers in primary school than to secondary schools? You're talking about the class to teacher ratio? No. For secondary school it's 85%. Primary school it will be raised to 65%. So are there any plans to bring it up so that secondary schools and primary schools are aligned? If not, why not? Well, if you're only talking about the ratio of GMs, graduate masters, well, for the long term, our goal is to bring them up to 100% for both primary and secondary schools. And as to which is to reach our target first, and which is given to be priority, we will constantly monitor that. Say, for example, for the master and for the master and the deputy master for secondary schools and primary school, they are equally important. And the number of students in primary schools are more or less the same as that in secondary school. You might say that it's because of historic problems when primary schools are transitioned from half-day to whole days. But why is there a difference? If you're only talking about the difference, well, what I'm talking about the difference of pay. We will take into account the workload, complexity of the issues they have to deal with. So you say that in primary schools, headmasters or headmistress has a smaller workload. Well, we think that the complexity of issues they face are equally difficult. And we've heard their demands, and we will consider that. There are still 4 members in the second round: Wong Kok-king, An Chang, Ip Kin Yuen, and myself. Anyone else in the second round? If not, 2 minutes, question and answer included. Mr. Wong Kok-king. Thank you. Chairman, I think you asked some of the questions I have in mind, but I would now like to give some time for the Undersecretary to tell us whether there is a timetable. For teachers with a degree in special schools, primary schools, and secondary schools to actually get the post of GMs. We don't have a timetable for the 65%. It depends on resources and priority. There are a number of issues in the education sector. Say, for example, headmaster in primary schools and secondary schools, we have to take into account resources. But if you have the plan to align the arrangement, there should be a timetable. Well, at least you will let the newly joined teachers to know how long they have to wait for. You shouldn't do it like PRH units. You must be aware that we are doing our best. And if you ask us to set a timetable, that means we have to set our resources allocation. It's not that we cannot, it's because we don't know when we will have the resources to do it. Mr. Wang, I hope that after they reach 65%, they should have a plan for it to reach 70%, 80%, 95%. Otherwise, in the same school, there will be teachers with a degree but hasn't got the GM post. And they have to wait forever. They do the same job, but they are paid with a different salary. Ms. An Chang. Paragraph 12. This touched by other members. You said that for some schools they have surplus. And they have about 2.5. You give them $2.5 million a year, but they have about $5.8 million in surplus. Why? It's quite a significant sum. Is it the case that they haven't used it yet, or what? How come 5% of the schools has a large amount of surplus? Mr. Tang? We're talking about a recurrent subsidy. Every year, given the need of schools, we issue the subsidy. For some schools, they have not exhausted the entire sum.
We hope that we can give some advice to the schools so that they do a better job in terms of budgeting. Once we have allocated money to schools, we hope that the money will be spent on their current students. Now that we have got the information, we'll be working through school visits so as to talk to schools individually. We would like to find out from schools as to their strategies. And we want to make sure that the resources will be used in such a way that it ties in with the development of the schools. We hope that they can be more effective in spending the money given. Mr. Yip, I'm on the same point. I would like to ask the administration, what is your optimal size of the reserve or surplus? Now that you have got a few months of their monthly expenditure being their surplus, what about you? What is your surplus? What is your reserve? How much have you got when compared to your monthly pay? Now, I think the current policy is such that all schools are allowed to have 12 months of their average monthly expenditure. Anything above that, it will be taken back by the administration. What has happened now is entirely permissible. Why is it being taken up here? It's got nothing to do with the establishment. Even if you have got a surplus, you can only engage contract staff or temporary staff. When we talk about staff establishment, we are talking about the permanent staff establishment. I think by raising this point, you have angered many teachers, schools, and federations. Mr. Young, yes, Mr. Yip is right. We've said that anything above 10 months of the average monthly expenditure will be taken back. Anything below that will be fine. What we are saying here is that when it comes to the use of resources, when they have a surplus, and if they need more teachers, when they need more teaching assistants so as to help with teaching and learning, so as to ease the burden of the teachers, they have the room to do so. It is just a reminder. We aren't saying that they have to use up all the surplus before we consider other options. Yes, you're talking about temporary staff, but then for the class-to-teacher ratio, it is a matter of staff establishment on a permanent basis. Now it's my second round. Well, to be frank, the morale as well as the career path will be affected. Now, you have told us that you have a long-term objective so that the ratio of graduate teacher posts will be 100% on a par with the secondary schools, but you haven't got a timetable. Your statement today will demoralize many teachers because it seems that the administration hasn't got much plan. So will it affect the interest to join the profession? I think your answer that it is merely an objective, you haven't got a timetable, it is really disappointing. And what about the huge salary differential between a head of a primary school and the head of a secondary school. Mr. Yang, teachers are the most important asset for schools. So we hope that we can maintain a professional team. In the long term, we hope that all the teacher posts will be graduate teacher posts for both primary and secondary schools. Of course, at this moment, I cannot say in how many years we are able to do so. Even if we haven't said this earlier on, what about the pay differential between primary school and secondary school headmasters? Well, as to whether the headmasters should have the same pay, I think we still have to consider the matter in great details. As I have said, primary school education is different from secondary school education. Primary school headmasters have a lot in common with secondary school headmasters. But then there is also a difference. You can't expect them to provide good service if you don't give them a good pay. Next item, Chinese history education in Hong Kong. So please refer to paper CB bracket 4 for 57/14 to 15 bracket 02. The Deputy Chairman has also submitted a paper. Hands up please for those who would like to ask questions, and please invite Mr. Eddie Ng, the Secretary for Education, to join us. Thank you, Mr. Ng, and the Permanent Secretary. Mr. Ng, I'd like to invite you to brief us on paper CP bracket 4 for 57/14 to 15 bracket 2. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chinese history education. Well, it is a core learning area for primary and secondary schools. For general studies in the primary school, systematically we have components of Chinese history. And for junior secondary schools, on average, every week there should be 2 lessons, 2 classes for Chinese history education. For senior secondary education all along, it is an elective. 90% of the schools provide this as an elective for senior secondary education. In 2001, when there was the curriculum reform, Chinese history has been regarded as compulsory for junior secondary education, and we have been keeping this over the years in line with the needs of the teaching and learning. We have been enhancing the interest in Chinese history learning, and we have prepared a lot of resources and teaching kits. We have been holding seminars and talks for teachers so as to enhance their knowledge in Chinese history and to enhance their skills in making use of the new teaching kits. The Quality Education Fund also supports projects in relation to Chinese history. In this year's policy address, the CE has already said that we are reviewing and renewing the Chinese history curriculum so as to enhance the experience and enhance the teacher training. This will also enhance the interest in Chinese history and culture. This will broaden the outlook on the part of the students. In the light of the latest trends of development, and since we have had Chinese history and also history for over 10 years, in May last year, an ad hoc committee was set up so as to review and revise the curricula of the 2 subjects. In the middle of 2015, schools and stakeholders will be consulted. We hope that in the middle of 2016, the review work will be completed. I would like to listen to members' views as to how we can enhance the subject and enliven the subject. Michael Tian, Wong Kwok Hing, Sterry Lee, Regina Yip, Sid Ho, Kenneth Chen, Helena Wong, Deputy Chair, Raymond Chen will be speaking in that order. First of all, Michael Tian. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 points, both about junior secondary schools. Now, the Education Bureau has mandated 2 classes per week, but then it is up to schools to exercise discretion. 78% of the schools have got the Chinese history as an independent subject. For the other schools, it is being made part of the integrated humanities subject. Well, it is said that Chinese history as an independent subject and on the dynastic chronological approach, this will facilitate students' understanding. But then, this is different from having another mode to deliver the curriculum. Therefore, I strongly urge the administration to do the following. For the remaining 22%, they must teach Chinese history as an independent history. We should not be combined with other modes. Now, for senior secondary education, I'm afraid that the remaining 22% of the students do not know much about Chinese history and Chinese historical figures. For junior secondary level, or rather for it should be half of the curriculum for modern history and half for ancient history. I think this is already the case for senior secondary level. Now we're talking about 4,500 years history for ancient history, but then for modern history, it is about 158 years. I think you should keep it to 1/3 for S1 to 2. I think we should talk about ancient history, and then for S3 it should be about modern history, which is more complicated. This is like the case of science subjects. You only stream the science subjects at S3. So I don't think we should devote half of the time to modern history and half of the time to ancient history. Secretary, what is your position? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, member. First of all, 88% of the schools have Chinese history as an independent subject. For 12% of them, they have got other modes so as to enhance their learning and teaching process. Well, this is the outcome of a survey of CUHK. And so an innovative mode has been used. Now, Mr. Tian would like to know about your own position rather than that of the professors. I think there is an advantage there. We have to try innovative modes all the time so as to elevate the teaching of Chinese history. Many teachers and students have come back to tell us that for ancient history, that's too long a history for them to approach modern history. Keep your questions for the second round. Mr. Wong Kwok Hing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question for the ED Bureau. It is said that we should emphasize more modern history, in particular after the Opium War. Hong Kong has been ceded to Britain. For the teaching of such modern history, I think this is very much related to one country, two systems of the basic law. And this is also related to the independent ideas, turning Hong Kong into an independent territory. I mean, if we don't understand modern history, if we don't understand that Hong Kong was ceded to Britain and became a colony, then people won't know about the significance of the return of Hong Kong to China in 1997. They won't know about the process. And of course, they then don't know about the joint Declaration as well as the Basic Law and how important they are. Therefore, enhancing modern history teaching is important, it is necessary, and it is related. So, Secretary, you are the head of the Bureau. How are you going to deal with the arrangements?
Thank you. You have named a number of factors for consideration, and we have taken that into account on top of the views of teachers. And that's why we have to strike a balance between ancient history and modern history. National identity is very important in the teaching of history. Let me refer to my colleague to explain to you why it's important. Mr. Lee. Sorry, speakers off mic. Please pull the microphone closer to you. Modern history, especially modern Chinese history, is very important in the understanding of the history of China for students. We understand that there is insufficient time to teach modern history. Less time is spent on it. We would like to make an adjustment to ensure that schools have a sufficient time to teach students about the history from the Opium War and its development to nowadays China, and we would like to give a better understanding to teachers about the fact that Hong Kong was ceded to Britain after the Opium War. Ms. Starry Lee. We've always advocated for making Chinese history an independent subject. Secretary mentioned about 88% vis-a-vis 12%. Some schools have used a different approach. If you lump Western history with Chinese history, it will be difficult to teach because Chinese history is already very long. So for Form 1 to Form 3, will you consider making Chinese history an independent subject? And in DSE, the number of students sitting for history or Chinese history have dropped significantly. Have you conducted any review? Are there any measures or any ideas to encourage more students to take history or Chinese history in the senior secondary years? Thank you. Let me emphasize that the 12%, out of the 12%, 4% of them still teach Chinese history separately. I visited these schools. They use Chinese history as the backbone with the addition of world history. So Chinese history is still the main element. And in relation to the 8%, we will talk to them as part of an improvement in curriculum to see if they have any other considerations. The thing is that a lot of schools use Chinese history as a backbone. And in relation to the number of students, if you look at the DSE numbers and the A-level and the Hong Kong Certificate of Examination, about 19% of the students have taken Chinese history. Of the students who have taken that as a subject in the DSE, they have performed quite well. And in terms of number of the students that have obtained 5-star or grade 2, the percentage is quite high. Well, we have had a very long discussion about making Chinese history an independent subject. And today the secretary said that he will talk to the 8% of the schools to see if they will make Chinese history a separate subject. Do you have a timetable? I said, well, at the middle of this year, we will have completed the review report. It will be implemented in the middle of next year. Next, Ms. Regina Ip. First, I would like to talk about a junior secondary school Chinese history. I think that your figures have been inflated. You said 88%. Some teachers told us that according to a different figure is 76%. So 55 secondary schools don't have Chinese history as a separate subject. That means well, the subject will have to appear from Form 1 to Form 3 before it can be called a separate subject or an independent subject. You talk about 2 periods per week, but what about those who use a cycle, 6-day cycle? Do they have 2 periods per week? You told us that you visited some schools. Can you give us a breakdown? You said that those schools you have visited, they use Chinese history as a backbone. Can you give us a breakdown? Tell us the schools. Tell us school by school that for S1 to SF3, they have Chinese history as a separate subject with 2 periods per cycle. Well, I don't want to make it sound like the secretary has visited schools as part of an inspection. If you would like, I can arrange for you to meet the 12% of the schools. Can you give us a breakdown? When I visited schools, I did not say that I will compile reports, and I will not be directing who to do what. And I would be very happy to make arrangements for you to meet them in a sharing session. How can you not give us a list of the schools if you have indeed visited these schools? Well, the teachers and the parents know about these visits. If you only want the list, I can give you that. List of what? Which schools have 2 periods per week and which schools it's a separate subject. So there are 3 years in the junior secondary. So will there be some schools doing 2 years out of the 3? And what about the average number of periods? Perhaps I will defer to Mr. Lee. Members are very concerned about schools that don't teach Chinese history as a separate subject. It's called history and culture. Members are concerned that there is not enough element of Chinese history. As the secretary said, that these schools use Chinese history as the backbone with addition of world history elements. Say, for example, if they're teaching the Qin and the Han dynasty, then students will be taught about the Roman Empire, and in another event in Chinese history, it will be compared to the event that happens at the same time in the rest of the world. Mr. Ho. History is written by victors. Well, then there was a time when people advocated about Hunan people ruling Hong Kong. And in 1944, there was a saying, and I think there are 2 scripts, 2 versions before they have taken power and after they have taken power. And I think it's very uninteresting if you take the approved curriculum. And I think Hong Kong will not be like Japan, that they will use textbooks that has been approved by the Japanese Ministry of Culture. And the official in Okinawa did not use the official curriculum. and they wanted to penalize him, but it backfired because of this fact that official was elected in an election. Well, now the Education Bureau will vet textbooks. School sponsors are very careful. They will not choose textbooks that covers June 4th. Will you undertake that you will not interfere with teaching materials? Secretary, I will defer to Dr. Chan. Compilation of textbooks are done in accordance with the guidance of curriculum development. And there are more than one experts in vetting the textbooks. I think that in teaching Chinese history, they teach students that should be taught world history as well. We have comparative literature. We should adopt the same approach to history so that our youngsters will know that although Chinese civilization started a long time ago, in the 19th century, China seriously lags behind. With a comparison between Chinese and world history, they will know better what happened. But I think it's something to do with examination. If you require students to just learn by rote, and that's how you test them, then you don't encourage them to analyze. How about putting the focus on analysis instead of requiring students to learn by rote as to what year, who died, who was assassinated? I wonder why, Miss Helena Wong, I wonder why all of a sudden the loyalists are so high profile about Chinese history not featuring in senior secondary school. Oh, well, have I jumped the queue? It doesn't matter. Secretary, you said that 88% of the schools in junior secondary level, Chinese history is an independent subject. In some other schools, Chinese history is blended with world history. I have no objection, because you have to learn Chinese history just as you have to learn about the world history. But how about Hong Kong history? Where is it put? Well, now Hong Kong is reunified with China. Will you put history of Hong Kong back into the curriculum? And I'm very concerned about this. I think my concern is shared by a lot of people in Hong Kong. We are to proceed with curriculum development or reform of Chinese history. What's our aim? To let students know about it? Or is it to, like Ms. Ho said, that you have to train students to analyze, to have critical thinking? Or is it the case that you want to instill a sense of patriotism into students, that they should be patriotic? Secretary, I will defer to the Deputy Secretary. The objective of the curriculum is for students to learn about the culture and history of our motherland, so that they will know about basic facts of Chinese history, and also to foster a sense of belonging and their national identity. We're talking about the objective of Chinese history and curriculum reform. Knowledge, empathy. You want students to love the country after learning Chinese history, or what do you want these students to learn about what happened? Do you have anything to add, Secretary? Well, to see the chronology of events in an objective way, that is also part of national identity. So you ask teachers to adopt an outcome-based approach. That is, after students have learned Chinese history, they will have a higher sense of belonging or identity. No. If you talk to students and teachers, they will tell you that the aim is to look at these events objectively. That is the first and foremost. And the second one is identity. Well, this is a global village. We have to learn about what happens all over the world, especially in Hong Kong. We pride ourselves because in Hong Kong we can learn about Western culture as well as Chinese culture. We have a very special position. And of course, it's our duty to learn about Chinese history. Well, this is actually an academic issue to be taken up by teachers. However, it's now got a hue of politics in it.
I think teachers want to teach Chinese history well on the school campus, but of course we need to have some adjustments. I don't think we should apply the brakes when it comes to the teaching of Chinese history and we stop at the Qing dynasty. I think we should give emphasis to important elements in Hong Kong history. When you have more time, then you don't have to make sacrifices in terms of time management. Now, I want to know how we can address issues that are close to our heart, like the 1911 revolution as well as the June 4th incident. I think many Hong Kong citizens take the matter seriously. Many people have been studying the matter seriously and have a critical thinking about that. So how are you going to enhance the two elements? Secretary, my understanding is that for the topics that you have referred to, they are all included in our curriculum. In fact, for the Outstanding Teachers Awards, well, I don't think it's just a matter of information. It is a matter of making it interesting, motivating students to learn. Say, for example, we can apply technology to assist in teaching so that students can make use of more information to come to their understanding. And then we want to ease the burden of teachers. So all such will be part of the enlivening the teaching. When we talk about 1911 revolution and June 4th, should we try to make it interesting? I don't think you don't want to make it interesting. How can we make June 4th interesting? Yip Kin Yun, I don't think we should use the adjective interesting to describe the two events. It is odd and it is upsetting us. For Chinese history, I think there are two questions that I want to ask. First of all, in the decision-making process, we may very well be giving a lot of comments and suggestions. I think ultimately we should leave it in the hands of the experts and also the frontline teachers so that they come to a professional judgment. My first question is, now currently, we talk about an independent subject at junior, secondary level, or we have it being part of integrated humanities or being combined with world history. Have we ever evaluated the outcome? I think it is being professional if we judge the most on their outcome. It would not be professional if we simply make casual comments. And then paragraph 13. Many Chinese history teachers are worried because all out of a sudden, in September, we are going to have a short-term initiative. My memory tells me that seldom have we resorted to short-term initiatives when it comes to curriculum reforms. You haven't got the textbooks to support you. It means that frontline teachers will be seriously affected. So can you not elaborate on the idea? Secretary, I'll answer the second part, and then my colleague will answer the other question. In April last year, an ad hoc committee was set up, and we believe that we are ready, and so this has been included in the policy address, and then before middle of next year, will be ready to take up the other initiatives. Mr. Yip, for the review, the ad hoc committee was already set up in May last year. We are now considering different modes, including not having it as an independent subject. We are studying the matter and will come up with recommendations. But then, first of all, we would like to look at the case of the practice of the majority of the schools. Nearly 90% of the schools are offering it as an independent subject, and therefore in the short term we will be refining the arrangement. Raymond Chen, I have to object to changing the ratio between ancient history and modern history. It used to be 2-to-1. Now, Michael Tian justified his point, saying that one is 4,000 years, the other over 100 years. I don't think it should be 50-50. Maybe the ratio should be different. And then for modern history, it is very controversial. For junior secondary school students, they will find it difficult. In the past, we used to have the leftist schools and the rightist schools, and then they will call the communists as robbers. Of course, it isn't as bad as it used to be, but it will still be difficult for junior secondary students to grasp the matter. Now, for national education, it has been dropped, but it is afraid that there is a tactic to use Chinese history subject to have brainwashing. Now, in this paper, we have got an annex, and that's about the biases and facts. Please go to point 6. Is studying ancient history the only way to nurture students' patriotic passion, which includes loving the nation and its culture? It says that it is closely related to students' life. Only students with adequate understanding of the recent historical development of a nation can be able to have a shared memory, feeling, and passion with their compatriots. I don't think we should expect our students to have a shared memory, feeling and passion with our compatriots on the mainland. I'm afraid by making such a statement, there is this suspicion of brainwashing the students. Secretary, let me say it in this way. This is the overriding principle, but the important point is that, as the two members have said, it is not you or me that will be making the decision. We leave it in the hands of the professionals. As to whether it will be 50-50 or 2-to-3, we leave it in the hands of the ad hoc committee who have a professional background and who have practical experience. Secretary, I'm worried that by having a shared memory, feeling and passion, I think you would understand that parents may be worried as to whether this is brainwashing. As a Chinese national, knowing more about the nation and having national identity, I don't think it is not acceptable to you. Next, Priscilla Leung. Mr. Chairman, the liberal studies was held up to be important, and so Chinese history as a subject was sort of squeezed out. Mr. Ho Hon Kun told me this point many years ago, and then the administration was too ambitious. It is not pleasing anyone in either way. Now, you may think that by learning world history as well, you know more and then it's better. But can we spoon feed so much when they don't even have a firm foundation? How can they manage so much? I was educated during the colonial era. I tried to go back to my earlier textbooks. It's easier and better to learn Chinese history and world history separately. You need to take the matter and face the matter squarely. The society just doesn't accept your arrangement. The other day, I had a debate with Mr. Lei Kai-dik, a member of the editorial board of Undergrad. Now, for the 3 unequal treaties, he said that China is occupying Hong Kong. We told him that it isn't the case. Well, in fact, Taiwan also had these 3 unequal treaties. I don't know why young people have harbored such separatist thoughts. I don't know how this has come about. To me, I think it's totally unacceptable. Just now, it is said that there are stipulations in the textbooks. What about the teaching materials? If in the market we've got something very controversial, then it is not good. I think there should be some agreed teaching materials instead of allowing teachers to have a free hand and try to use materials which advocate separatism. Now, I have read the textbooks for secondary schools. Most of them have referred to Benedict's ideas about the rule of law. Well, I think teachers must be objective in covering the curriculum and imparting the information and knowledge to the students. For Chinese history, I don't think it should be made a part of a curriculum mode of linking 2 histories. I think if someone is interested in world history, he can sit the exam for both subjects. I don't think Chinese history should be left to the discretion and should not be regarded as an elective. Everyone must know Chinese history. Leung Kwok Hong. Well, for the past 17, 18 years, we want to treasure the sweet old days. Sieg Tung had 7 years, and he caused trouble for us. The same for Donald Zhang, and then for CY Leung, again, he has been harming us for 2 years. Now, just let us recall what has happened since the handover. It's difficult even to write an objective and fair account of the history of Hong Kong for the past 17, 18 years. To me, learning Chinese history or learning history, for that matter, should be for interest only. You won't force people to have interest in Chinese history just because they learn Chinese history. For others who took grade A at the Hong Kong CEE, if they haven't read history since, then they would have forgotten everything that they have learned when they were young. Now, you want children to learn Chinese history as a compulsory subject. Please consider the heavy burden on the children. Now, Chinese history is very long, and we haven't got any interruption at all. So, if you really want to do it, please do some soul searching. If I try to quiz you on Chinese history, can you give me correct answers? What is meant by Zheng Guan's administration? You must know the answer. You don't need to give an answer. What about Kai Yuan Tianbao? Of course, you know Zheng Guan's administration. That's about the Tang Dynasty. What about the alliance of Chang Yuan? Now, of course, there are some historical views that the Song Dynasty was not good and they had brought humiliation to China. But then others were saying that for the Song Dynasty, it's a time for a respite from the warring period. In 1928, the CCP had a meeting in Moscow, and it's a Chinese political party. There was a resolution to say that they were in support of the independence of the Taiwanese people. Now, well, I still have that textbook. I still have that book, so it is substantiated. Have you ever heard that there is a political party having a meeting in a foreign capital and passed a resolution to support the independence of Taiwan?
There are still 2 members in the first round, and Chang to be followed by myself. Thank you. Well, Mr. Leung Kwok-hung is right in one thing, that you have to have an interest to study history. And pedagogy is very important when it comes to arousing an interest. I heard from a radio program that a young person is very interested in history because he was very lucky. He came across a teacher that made it a very interesting subject to teach students history, like telling a story. It's better than the novels. It's very challenging, indeed. Like, how can you get teachers to teach history by making it an interesting subject? It's not like those ancient Chinese. You can give me a text and I won't be able to tell what it's saying. And you talk about modern history, Cultural Revolution, June 4th, maybe different teachers will teach these events differently. Some may be very radical. Maybe 2 neighboring schools will teach the same events from different perspectives, and students will learn the same event, learn the different angles of the same event. Would there be room for students to analyze the events? It's very challenging indeed. Secretary, yes, the pressure is tremendous. That's why we have enhanced support to teachers. And teaching history is not just done in the classroom, it's outside the classroom as well. I will defer to Mr. Lee and Mr. Ip. When it comes to support to teachers, we will continue to enhance our support. Well, we have been promoting deliberative thinking. Whether it's a student of junior secondary or senior secondary, they are encouraged to analyze. But don't think that students will not reflect on something they have learned earlier in the years. If you, for a primary school student, when he learned about atoms in primary school, the same thing may be different in secondary school. Now it's my turn. From the information paper you supply and the replies you have made, my understanding is that you are quite happy about the development of Chinese history as a subject in schools. You are even quite smug about it as well. But however, for those in the education sector, they think you're doing very poorly. After the Occupy movement, even mainland officials criticize you for doing a poor job. You said that 88% of junior secondary schools teach Chinese history as a separate subject. Figures are important, but figures are dead, subject to interpretation. History teaching, is it sufficient in secondary schools to enable students to learn about the motherland, to forge a national identity? Of course, you can give it to an ad hoc committee to look into it. But to me, if you do that, it will be filibustering. You're stalling. So are you happy with our Chinese history education? Is it sufficient to enable students to know about the mother country and whether it forges a national identity? A direct answer will be no, I'm not happy with that. That's why we have formed an ad hoc committee. That's why we would like to improve the curriculum, teacher training, etc., and to make it more interesting. And because the subjects are youngsters, so we have to introduce an element of technology, and we need to take students outside classroom so that they can feel it, so that we will have a comprehensive and good blueprint. So, is it effective in forging a national identity by doing it the current way or making it a separate subject? We can't rely just on one thing, whether it's the learning of Chinese history, national education. They are all part of one. So you agree and support national education. You think that this will be conducive in forging national identity. National education has not been put to the back burner. It is still part of a humanities subject. Second round, Mr. Michael Tian and some other members. Let me know how many members would like to ask questions in the second round, and I will decide about the time. We have another important matter, life planning education. Let me first ask you, do you object to my extending this meeting by 15 minutes? If I don't do that, there won't be a second round. So this will be extended to 6:45. I'll draw a line here. Michael Tian, Virginia Ip, Priscilla Leung, Helena Wong, Ann Chang, and Deputy Chairman. I will not allow any more members to ask questions. 2 minutes. Michael Tian. I hope I will not embarrass the secretary with my questions or put him in a difficult spot. On the 29th of October, in your reply to Mrs. Virginia Ip's question, you said there are currently 390 schools with separate Chinese history subject in junior secondary school, 87.63%, and about 300 schools, that is 70.86%, they have a separate Chinese history, and 9%, about 40 schools, for maybe 1 or 2 years, they have Chinese history as a separate subject. So there is only 1 year when it's a separate subject. For the other 2 years, it will be blended with the other humanities subjects, and it's still called a compulsory Chinese history subject. Well, the secretary might have forgotten what he said in reply to previous questions. But the thing is, the 78% of schools, is it the result of your requirement or the result of the market mechanism? It's actually the latter. They teach it as a separate subject for 1 year and is treated as separate in the junior high. So how do you know that? That for the 88% is not the case. In the future, maybe they will only teach it as a separate subject for 1 or 2 years, and they muddle through. If you do not stipulate the requirement, then you will not be able to do it. I will defer to my colleague to give you further information about the figures. No need. My question was, how can you ensure that your 88 and my 78% will not be dropped to 0? Because if they teach it for 1 year, they treat it as a separate subject for junior high. For S1 to S3, there can be 2 periods per week, or they can compress it from 3 years to 2 years by increasing the number of periods. And they have to follow the curriculum. But you did not reply to my question. In the future, there may be no school that will teach Chinese history as a separate subject for 3 years. Maybe they just teach it for 1 year, and for the other 2, it's integrated humanities subjects. Will you classify them as Chinese history as separate subject 100%? When we talk to schools, we will confirm that. Time's up. Mrs. Yip. I've heard from other members, I agree with some of them. I agree with Mr. Ikin Yun said that, when it comes to teaching Chinese history, it should be seen from the professional perspective, that is, to make it most effective. And for junior secondary and senior secondary, you said that you would like ancient history and modern history to be half-half. Mr. Ray Chan is worried that it would advocate the ideas of CPC, the Chinese Communist Party. But I will see this as from a professional perspective. I heard from some schools that in the last term of Form 3, if you start history of the Republic of China, there is not enough. Because we have a monarchy regime all the way to 1911, and that has a significant impact. And if you only teach half of modern history, then students will not understand. And you said some schools would like to use the integrated curriculum, say the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty is dubbed as the middle period by the West. It's kind of like the medieval times, Dark Ages. It's very it's very difficult. Wouldn't it be over ambitious? And as a result, it will not be effective if you have an integrated curriculum, because the world is complicated. And is it reasonable to have ancient and modern history as half and half? Well, the integration is about the pedagogy. And as to the percentage, we have yet to reach a conclusion. We would like to strike a balance. And instead of having more time spent on ancient history than modern ones. Well, what about a report from the Wen-Wei Pao, dated the 4th of February, junior secondary school? Modern history will occupy half of the curriculum. It is going to be implemented in September. I did not write that article, so tell me whether it's going to be implemented in September, half-half. I have answered this question. That's impossible because it will be done in 2 years down the line. It will also start with ancient history. Well, the Education Bureau has been saying that they don't like spending too much time on ancient history. It seems that officials in the Education Bureau hate ancient history. Well, in paragraph 23, Secretary, you said that the ratio between ancient history and modern history will be adjusted to 50-50, and it will be implemented in September in the coming school year. Are you going to amend this? Well, that's exactly my question. If it's going to be implemented in September, how can teachers adjust? Can you give me more information? What stage are you at? Will there be textbooks? Just now, a member emphasized on making Chinese history a mandatory subject, a separate subject in junior secondary. I think it has to be dealt with in a professional way. There are different approaches to Chinese history. One way is making it a separate subject. The other one is to integrate it with world history into one subject. In mainland China and Taiwan, Chinese history is not a separate subject. On the mainland, it's history with Chinese and Western history. You said that it can't be done. It has to be a separate subject. How can you explain it away? And if you think that schools should not be allowed to choose, it's because they haven't done well. You have to explain the justification and whether it will be effective.
If the schools can offer it and teachers can do it, don't you think it's better to leave it to the schools? And after all, it is a matter of professional judgment and professional practice. Another point is that for Chinese history, I've talked to many Chinese history teachers, and also I can make such an observation from my many years of teaching. Dr. N. Zhang has also referred to this, that is the teachers. For teachers teaching Chinese history, we encounter the same problem like teachers for other teachers or teaching other subjects. How many teachers are teaching a subject that they have taken a major? If not, then they find it difficult, and all they can do is to read directly from the text, and they can only teach something very simple. Like in the case of Chinese history, how many Chinese history teachers have had Chinese history as their major when they were at the university? Secretary. Now, for paragraph 13, it says that the committee is discussing. It's not a matter of discussing the matter. Do you have the statistics? Either you have it or you don't. Next, Priscilla Leung. It is not all out of a sudden that we want to discuss this topic. Since I joined the LegCo, I've never stopped raising questions about Chinese history and liberal studies. Let's be direct. Yes, I agree that it should be a matter for the professionals, but what worries me is that for the content as well as the methodology, I don't think it has been professional. It seems that it has always been biased. There are people who have never been consulted in the past. So when you do the consultation exercise, please tell us whether you are going to be more balanced, so that you won't be having the same group of people as the consultees all the time. From the submissions received, I understand that there is a lot of grievance. Now, for national education and liberal studies, you don't need to deliver it in the form of a subject. It's only you yourselves that have created a problem for yourselves. Now, for Chinese history, it should be an independent subject. As I have said, if somebody is interested, he can sit an exam for the subject. Even if you're not interested, you are duty-bound to learn the history of your own nation. I myself like to watch the History Channel, and I have been watching documentaries like The Rise of the Great Powers. For the History Channel, I think the part about Chinese history is even more interesting than how Chinese history is being taught in Hong Kong. Now, secondary school students will be very interested to watch the documentaries. Once I went to Zhengcheng, and then when they teach Chinese history, they have been using multimedia tools. So when students learn Chinese history, they find it very interesting. For American history, they have got this clip called Who Created America? They have the three major families, Rockefeller and the others. So it is a multi-perspective thing. How can you expect a secondary school teacher to do it? So I think teachers are biased. So we must have an agreed set of teaching materials. We only teach those which are based on objective reality. Now, you may think that something in modern history is something very significant, but set against the long history of our nation, it may not be so. So there must be an agreement as to what should be taught and to what extent. So you need to consult the views of different people. Leung Kwok Hong. Now we are talking about the learning of the subject. Now you have to make sure that they're interested to learn it. That's the first point. Second point is that for a long time, you have failed to invest in the teaching of history, which is part of the humanities. And so you haven't got teachers of the right caliber to teach the subject. In the case of Sich Tong, all out of a sudden, he said that there's no need to have midwives and nurses, and so for 10 years or so, we haven't got any training places for them. Now, when it comes to the qualification of teachers, I find that my classmates have already forgotten their history knowledge. Are they teachers? Some of them are, some of them are not, but they've all forgotten their history knowledge. Secretary for teachers. From my contacts and from information given to me, teachers have found that they're under a lot of pressure. China has a long history of 5,000 years. It is not easy to teach such a long history. And then for students, I think modern history is closer to them and it's easier to raise their interest. Now let me answer the other question. 2/3 of the teachers have history as their major. What about the remaining 1/3? We're trying to address this problem. And then for teaching materials, I think it is right to provide the teaching materials. It should be enhanced. And we should sit down and have a talk. Many teachers have got different experience and different backgrounds. We should have a meeting, we should have a discussion, and then come to consensus and enhance our teaching materials. Mr. Chairman, let me come to my point. Chinese history shouldn't be a compulsory subject. Leave it to students who are interested. If you make it a compulsory subject, it will certainly lead to controversies. Now, we are interested in history because we want to learn a lesson from that. Even when you read the history of one particular period, you can still learn something from it. You can learn a lesson from it. Now, you have to grade the performance of the student by giving them a grade A or B, etc. So you have to judge the performance by the volume of history knowledge that he can master. Helena Wong, the last one to speak. Mr. Chairman, I asked a question earlier on, and that's about the purpose, the objective of teaching Chinese history. Other than disseminating knowledge, is it also about making somebody patriotic and feel for the nation? Now we have got Chinese history for junior secondary. Now, for Chinese history, critical thinking and multi-perspective thinking should be emphasized. For such basic skills and basic principles, that's for history. Would it also be applied to Chinese history? Yes, certainly. In other words, when we teach our students about our national history, we are not going to dodge the controversial issues. And then the objective is not that we want to measure by how much they have enhanced their patriotism or this awareness of national identity. Because students are allowed to think otherwise, or assume and date that after learning Chinese history, they become very patriotic and they have a high sense of national identity. They have to be objective, diverse, and they should be able to tell what is right and what is wrong and have objective thinking. Now, if somebody having learned Chinese history, one may have a lot of queries about the institutions, about the party, and he hasn't grown more patriotic. Secretary, students don't just learn such things from their lessons. You learn from other sources as well. We want them to be able to think from different perspectives, and they are able to tell what is right, what is wrong. Now, teachers are providing more support, and we hope that teachers can think more so that students can benefit. And that's why we're saying that there should be a lot of exchanges between the two places. Now, it seems that he is advocating the skills one uses in liberal studies. What worries us is that you may want to indoctrinate the ideas in us. Now, when we talk about the unequal treaties, etc., for the mainland, Chinese history will only criticize the invasion of the colonial powers. We don't want to have the same methodology as that adopted on the mainland. Dr. N. Jiang, Mr. Chairman, I in the past never learned any modern history. It's only in recent years, or rather it's only upon graduation from university, then I paid my first visit to China and learned about Cultural Revolution. When I was in primary school, I read the newspapers, and then I learned about corpses floating in the river, and the water currents brought them to Hong Kong. So I had a lot of fear. Later on, I went to the mainland to visit, and gradually I came to understand that there was a reason behind it, and there were causes behind it. So by learning more, then one would have a more objective analysis. So it isn't just a matter of having to be patriotic. I think if you love your nation, I think it is something that happens naturally rather than just a matter of having read a particular book. You need to know about the modern history. You have to learn why the doors were closed and why they were opened later, and what caused the Cultural Revolution. On the mainland, Cultural Revolution has always been a heated topic, and many people have attributed different causes. Now, even for officials, they have also got very negative comments about the Cultural Revolution. And for the June 4th, now we are all gathering information. I'm sure future generations will have their own judgment of what happened in the past. Now, for two mainlanders who are of the same generation. The two of them have different views about something that happens during their lifetime. Now, Chinese history should be a compulsory subject in secondary school curriculum. Now that this will be done, and I think that we should give more emphasis to modern history. History is like a mirror. For ancient history, like the Xia dynasty, the Shang dynasty, etc., I don't think they are close enough, and then sometimes the histories may not actually be telling us what actually happened. I think that should be it. You want to supplement a point about paragraph 13 of the paper? Yes. Now, the ad hoc committee has received a lot of different views, and therefore many people are interested to know what has been discussed. And one of them being that it is hoped that by September the split will be 50-50. We are still at the stage of collecting information. It hasn't been decided.
Yes, the Secretary has clarified. Last item, progress report on implementation of life planning education. Paper number CB bracket 4457 / 14 to 15 bracket 04. Secretary, please be succinct. When you take us through the paper, please raise your hand so if you want to ask questions. We have limited time. Let me take members through the paper when my colleagues are getting seated. Well, in response to information technology changing rapidly and the explosive growth of knowledge, we need to equip students so that they are prepared to take on board life learning. And with the new senior secondary curriculum and the promotion of different pathways, students will need to get better equipped. With life planning, the students will be taught about the different choices in life and in the career, and they will know better about opportunities in order to help with better life planning education. Starting from 2014-15, we provide a new recurrent career and life planning grant. We will take reference from the 2014 wage level. Each school will be given over about $500,000. In 2014, we're talking about a commitment of $265 million. And this will enhance the capabilities of the life planning team in schools and to enhance career guidance, to coordinate life planning and cooperation with the business sector. There are also different measures to support life planning, including school visits, enhancement of teachers' professional capabilities, and business school partnership. You'll find the information of the implementation of these measures starting from 2014-15 school year. In the coming years, we will enhance the business school partnership program so that students are provided with learning opportunities to explore different careers and to learn about requirements so that they can get prepared before they start work. We will extend this program to school heads, teachers, and parents. We will consolidate the effective elements in this program. We're happy to listen to members' views and answer questions. I will now chair the meeting on behalf of the chairman. Who would like to ask questions? We have Mrs. Yip, Ms. An Chang, and Dr. Kenneth Chan, and Mr. Long Kok Hong. 3 minutes. When will we end? 6:45. So 3 minutes. Mrs. Regina Ip. Secretary, I have 2 questions to start with. You don't have to agree with me, but you have to explain. Some people say that you now take up life planning education as a result of the new senior secondary curriculum. It's a problem brought by it because it's now 4+2 or 4+3. So it's not like in the past when we take 9 or 10 subjects. So once you have chosen the wrong subject, say for example, if in secondary school, chemistry and biology are not taken, then the student cannot read medicine. So at an early stage, a student will have to choose the right subjects. That's a problem. Problem 1. And the second one is that the new senior secondary academic structure will bridge to universities, but only 1/3 students can go to publicly funded places, and and another 1/3 of them will have to study associate degree. So some people can't even get a chance for tertiary education, and that's why you have to have this life planning education for those who cannot continue their studies. There is a teacher, Mr. Hui. He has resigned to join the jockey club. I think there is a program. It's taken up by the jockey club. Can you explain why it's taken up by the jockey club and not the administration? There is no information I have that life planning education is there because of the DSE. There is a change in environment. We would like to give different choices to students. This is not to prepare students to get into universities. There are 37 applied subjects. So the priority is to equip students to cope with life challenges. In the first year of university education, they are not asked to specialize. So students are given the chance to consider in the first year. So there is no need to start choosing your subjects too early. They will have time to choose the subject they like and see if they're interested. And in relation to the program of the Association of Careers Masters and Guidance Masters, we did not know about this. Our understanding is that the association contacted the Jockey Club directly, and they have selected schools to participate in the program. Ms. An Chang. Paragraph 10 is something that I'd like to ask about. You said that 240 teachers will be trained every year, and it will take 3 years to achieve the target. So every year 240, and it will take 3 years. I don't think that's enough, because if each school would like to send two teachers to the training course, there won't be enough places. I would defer to the DS. In relation to training places, in relation to career guidance teams, back in the 1990s, there was already 100-hour training courses. So some of the teachers have already been trained. This is an addition, yes. We would like to increase the number of places. We would also like to disseminate information about the latest development of career guidance to give them most updated information. You're talking about $200 million a year. How can we make sure that our youngsters will be taught so that they will know which path to take, so that they will be more confident about the future? How do you assess that the $200 million will be put to good use? How do you gauge the effectiveness? Say, if I walk into a secondary school in Chum Shui Po, Form 5, Form 6 student will be able to tell me? Or is it the case that I ask, well, what would you like to study in university? I don't know. What would you like to do in life? I don't know. So in 3 or 4 years down the line, if I walk into the same school and ask the same the students of the same year, they will be able to tell me, well, I'm not going to go to university, but I would like to take up some vocational training. I would like to be an electrician. Is that one way to gauge the effectiveness? Thank you. We're talking about different levels. We would like to turn this life planning into part of the school structure. It should be part of the 5 or 3 year plan of schools. The second part is about the content, and the third part is professional development. And on the fourth area is about studies and also utilization of some tools. And then we can take a survey. We can do surveys to find out how much students know about the future, whether there is any change in students' attitude, to let students know that pursuing academic study is not the only way out. Dr. Kenneth Chan. It's very difficult to understand what these 3 words mean. Life planning education. I think it's difficult to define it. Well, if you are born and bred in Hong Kong, there was always a discipline master, and at one point in your life, he or she will talk to you about your plans in life, and it's not natural to not know what you want to do. And at one stage, if you're not good with your studies, you may be referred to some other area. Say, for example, seafaring and some other vocational training. And if you talk to youngsters, of course, you will get a blank face because they won't think much about it. And I think maybe we should do more about, say, guidance, counseling. Well, maybe a 5-year-old will say that I want to be the chief executive, because nowadays 5-year-olds know about buying properties. Or maybe, you'll be told that, that I would like to join the Communist Party and one day I'll be the chief executive. So are there actual indicators so that we can track the result? So that those students who have received life planning education can give us some answers that will point us to how effective this education is. You don't have to make it sound so grand. We don't want to plan the lives of students. It's to enhance students' capabilities to plan for life. It's student-oriented, with teachers are supporting them. Teachers will have to have the capability to support students. So it's not just about continuing his or her studies, about subject selection. It's also about knowing about what you want in life, what you would like to do, find your way. And we have this business school partnership program. So the students will be exposed to a business environment at an early stage so that they can get a feel of what it's like to be in a working environment. It's part of the overall planning of schools. Well, there's not enough time. Maybe I'll have an exchange with the secretary later on. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, I'm sure that you have read about this piece of news, and you might have been shocked by it. On the mainland, a child was asked what he would like to do in the future, and the child said, "I would like to be a corrupt official because I'll be rich." And there's another girl in Hong Kong. She said she would like to be the chief executive. She's rather innocent. And she said, because I don't have to do my homework, I can just pass the buck. If I can't finish my homework during summer, I would say, well, it's because of the bad weather.
So, if your life planning is such that you want to be the CE, that means you can tell lies throughout your whole life. I think this thing called life planning education is something plucked from the thin air. Now, right, when you are young, you are not yet at your prime days. You can be imaginative. So what is there to be planned? I've told Eddie many times. I think you just allow them to have more choices by providing such an institution. In Germany, when you're in year 9, you can either go to college or you can become a technician, a craftsman. You can have a 3-year apprenticeship. In this way, if you provide the same, you have different pathways. You can go to different routes, and if you go down one route which is not appropriate, then you can start again. But we haven't got this in Hong Kong, and only 20% of our children can only go to a publicly funded university. It's very difficult to get this opportunity. So for our children, what's happening to them? They don't want to become the CE or a corrupt official. I think what they have to do is to try hard to adapt to the academic structure. And then another concern is a property. Now, the property prices have already doubled. If you want to get married and raise a family, you need a property. What's there to be planned? So I think it is totally corrupt. If we have an education reform, we must have resources to make sure that once a student has made a choice, there will still be a backup fallback position so that there's no way that they have to fear for their choices. So either they want to become a corrupt official, the CE, or try to get a property. So if you can really provide 60% of the students with a subsidized place, then there's no need they need to worry, and they can just take it easy. I will be the last to speak. No, we haven't got second round of questions. I think Leung Kwok Hong is right. If you provide for a diversified set of pathways, then you can have life planning. Otherwise, it's difficult. I think there are a lot more to talk about in terms of our structure. Anything else? Any LB? No? Then meeting adjourned. Thank you.